Hello, we are In Conversation, a podcast from the School of Social and Family Dynamics at Arizona State University, designed to showcase timely and informative insights from leading faculty, researchers, and other experts, which impact the ever-changing social world we live in. Here at the School of Social and Family Dynamics, we recognize that the lands where we are hosting this conversation at Arizona State University belong to the Maricopa and Pima peoples, and we are privileged that we can welcome you to today's conversation.
Welcome everyone. My name is Aubrey Hoffer, and I'm your graduate student host of In Conversation with the School of Social and Family Dynamics. My wonderful guest today is Dr. DeLay. Dr. DeLay is an interdisciplinary scholar who both studies social relations and promotes these relations within science. She has published some of the first papers to use social network analysis within developmental journals. Much of her work is focused on peer relationships and understanding the influence that peers have on each other. In addition to her incredible work, Dr. DeLay is also a dedicated faculty mentor. I would know this because, for full transparency, Dawn is my faculty mentor. Dawn, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Aubrey. I'm so happy to be here.
So Dawn, the podcast starts and ends the same way. I'm going to ask you 3 rapid fire questions. These introductory ones are just to get to know you a little bit better on a surface level, and then the ending ones are going to get quick bites of your personal philosophy. The point is to just try to answer them off the top of your head in about a sentence. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
All right, Dawn. So my first question for you is, what is your favorite hobby?
Oh, goodness. Okay, so my favorite hobby is being outdoors. I like to hike. So I think that would be my favorite hobby, is walking in the woods. Yeah.
I love that. So question number 2 is, do you have any nicknames, or were there any funny names that your family called you when you were a kid?
Oh, absolutely. So I was called Donnie, and I have groups of friends that still call me Donnie. And my cousins didn't know that my name was Dawn until I was probably like 13. So I am known by a large group of people as Donnie.
I love that. So my third question, Dawn, is what does a perfect morning look like to you?
Okay, I like to have a cup of coffee and I like quiet time. So I am someone that will often sit quietly and write or meditate in the morning before I kind of get my day going.
That sounds like a perfect morning to me. So as we get into our conversation a little bit, one of the main things that you have studied in your career has used a methodology called social network analysis. So for anyone who's totally unfamiliar with what that is, can you explain what is social network analysis?
That's a good question, Aubrey. So social network analysis is, well, simply it's the study of social networks. So I use it to study social groups. So I would look at groups of people and their connections or relationships is what that would be in my work. So I'm really interested in social relationships and how social relationships within groups function and how they in turn make that social group function for better or worse. To be a little more, broad, is anything that you could define as connections between nodes. So a node could be any kind of network. So it could be a network that's found in the brain within systems where there's connections within systems. It could be an animal network where you have connections between animal relationships. It could be trade connections. So it can be broadly applied, but I use it to study, human relationships and human connections.
Right. And a lot of the ways that you have used social networks has been to explore how peers, particularly adolescents, are interacting within groups. What I'm curious about is, well, what were your peer groups like when you were a kid? Was there anything that you experienced that made you wonder, wow, how do these peer groups function? And maybe that came up later when you were studying.
Yeah. Absolutely. So definitely my experience has fed into the work that I've chosen to do. And I think I need to take a little bit of a step back that my family, we moved out to a really small town. And I was the new kid in town starting school, like elementary school. But because it was a small town in Kansas, everyone from that small town already sort of knew each other and had their connections. So the children in the town were connected by the parents' historical connections. That's sort of the environment. And I struggled with making friends and making connections throughout elementary school. So it was something that, maybe I would have a friend here, a friend there. It would usually be someone else that had moved into the school that was sort of, on the outskirts of the social network, so to speak. And I had, some social struggles. And then in my transition, that was a K-8 school. And my transition to high school, I ended up being connected with someone that was really high status, or you might call them popular. And so built a relationship with that person. And it was almost like overnight, my experience in that school changed. Like nothing about me really had changed other than who I was connected to. And it made me become fascinated with this process in social groups, how, groups form and function, how status hierarchies are informed, and also the meaning of our connections, like what that means for the social group, and how much of it is really based on individuals and individual characteristics, or some kind of larger structural system. So for example, in that transition period, I ended up being like structurally connected with somebody. If there's like a group status hierarchy that was at a higher status, and then it opened all this access to these other connections and other people within the network that wanted to, have, resource exchange. In this case, it would be like have conversations, invite me to do things. Like suddenly I was part, of the system in a way that I had never been before. And it really made me think that groups and the structure of groups are really powerful. And there are certain people within these groups that hold a lot of power. And later in my work, with children and adolescents, I'm interested in looking at these groups and thinking about those structural positions on who could be leaders, who could be connectors, who could create, positive kinds of change to create a healthier, happier, group or system. So that's sort of my backstory as far as how I got really interested in groups and relationships and how that all functions.
That is so interesting, Dawn. I think that really parallels an experience that I had when I was younger, where I moved into a school system when I was in third grade. And unfortunately, I was bullied a lot and I didn't have very many friends. And then when I was in high school, I moved to a different town. So I joined a new high school. And I just was so amazed at how my network totally opened, because I was now in this group of people where, any preconceived notions about me as like a bullied kid just weren't there. And it was really interesting how my social functioning changed so much overnight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a powerful thing having that, kind of individual identity, and the group, how that group interacts with that individual identity, and how you can change into another system or group and have a completely different experience. And again, like my goal would be that we create healthy systems and healthy groups for all children, all identities, so that's really kind of the motivation behind my work.
Yeah. Okay, Dawn. So you went to high school, got through high school, and then you moved on to college and you majored in psychology. When you decided to go to grad school, what was that decision like? Did you immediately go from undergrad into grad school, or did you have a sort of different transition?
Yeah, good question. I actually had an idea that I wanted to go to grad school. I was pretty certain about that, but I was not certain exactly what I wanted to study. And I had also gone to a small liberal arts school where I had a great education, wonderful educators, but I didn't have a lot of opportunities to engage in research and getting like broader exposure. So what I decided to do is after I graduated, I think I applied to maybe just a couple of schools, like my very top choices. And I decided if I wasn't going to get into those top choices, that I was going to spend this time to get more experience. And so I graduated also with an early childhood education degree. So I was able to teach. I took 2 years where I was teaching preschool and watching the preschool groups and preschool networks and how they function, which was a lot of fun. And then I also worked at some universities. So the University of Kansas, for example, and I volunteered my time as a research assistant and got some more experience that way. So did like conference presentations and worked on some projects, and I helped graduate students. I was helping to collect data in foster homes in Kansas City at the time. So giving questionnaire interviews to students and just getting some more background in what research was, so that I can make a decision on what I wanted to do with my psychology degree, because I wasn't really sure. I knew that the program I had graduated from had like a counseling program, but I wasn't aware of all the different options that I might have as far as graduate school. And once I got exposed to research and doing that kind of work, I was very interested in pursuing that. And so that's ultimately why I chose to work with a developmental psychologist to get my graduate degree, so I could continue to do some of that work.
That's great. So, what was that experience like when you were applying to grad school? How did you find your program or get connected with your mentor?
Well, so the second time I applied more broadly. And I always say that it's really important that whether, if you're invited to a program, that you want to meet the people that you're going to be working with. So I definitely went on a lot of interviews to find out more about like the culture and the community, and also meet my potential supervisors. And I learned a lot that way. And ultimately what ended up happening is my supervisor, part of what I had done in the 2 years before I went back to school, is I had gone to Finland, and I had actually been in the preschools there working as, I was an assistant teacher because I wasn't fluent in Finnish, but I was working in the schools there and doing an intercultural education program. And my supervisor, who ended up being Brett Larson, who is, a very well-known developmental psychologist that studies peer relationships. And he recruited me very heavily because of my time spent in Finland, because he had collaborators in Finland. So right away, there was that connection of that shared kind of background and experience, which is a lot of what we see in networks, how, sometimes similarities will foster different kinds of relationships, which in this case, it fostered a mentor-mentee relationship for graduate school. But that was exciting for me to have the opportunity to potentially go back to Finland and continue to build those connections. And it has also opened the door to making my work, more international. So I do work and collaborate broadly within the US, but also internationally. And so that was a really great, choice for me. I felt like I got wonderful training in graduate school. I learned a bit more about the importance of relationships and networking. And ultimately I landed at ASU. I'm very happy here as an assistant professor today. So.
Do you ever feel like your work with preschoolers ever comes up or feels relevant when, maybe you're working with undergraduate students or even just within academia as a whole? Were there any things that you learned while working with preschoolers that still feel relevant to you now?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by social functioning and social groups and dynamics and identity, how that interplays. And I did learn a lot. I learned a lot about not taking yourself too seriously, smiling often. That's one thing that preschoolers definitely will teach you. And I also learned, I remember watching the children in my class interact, and how I was, there was a period where I was in a 2.5 to 3.5. So kind of like that 3 to 4 age group. And there was this process where early on, when the children were younger, they were very kind of able to interact, play with any toy, interact with anybody in the room. And then later, there would be more judgments as far as who they were interacting with. I saw this a lot happen along gender lines. So you're a girl, so you don't do this, or you're, and there's a few students in particular that I felt like that really affected them. So I don't know that this relates necessarily. I know your question was more, how does it translate to older networks and groups? But I think how it translates is that we still can face those pressures, right? There can still be this tendency to say, well, I really want to have this interaction, or I really want to have this collaboration, but I can't because whatever the because might be. And so I, both as a teacher with young children in a classroom, aim to foster interconnections and relationships across whatever types of boundaries they may have been exposed to and starting to identify. But I also try to do that in my work today. And I talk about it when I do teach undergraduates and graduate students about the importance of looking across perspectives and looking outside of the box of whatever, your particular background or training might be. Having that understanding that there is going to be different perspectives, and that's okay. That doesn't have to be a distancing mechanism or a threat. It can actually be something that could build a very strong, collaborative relationship where, for students, could foster opportunities, could foster your research or your work in a productive, kind of way. So hopefully I kind of answered the question in a roundabout way there.
No, I think that was a fantastic answer. You've really driven home how important it is for all of us to try to be interdisciplinary in our work, especially as researchers, right? And I think it's, most people, I think, can understand conceptually what interdisciplinary work looks like on, sort of a theoretical level. But can you elaborate a little bit on, what does it look like to be interdisciplinary at a methodological level? And why is it important that we would, examine the different statistical approaches that are used in different fields?
Yeah. Well, in short, I think we can learn a lot from each other. So what happens often within fields is we're sharing information and we're building science in a certain way, and we're building language around that science. And there could be something very similar or maybe something that's going to be complementary to the work, within one silo happening in another. I see this a lot. Language is a big thing. So I see that often we will say something to the effect of, I know of no other work that's examined XYZ, where that may be actually happening just outside of someone's discipline or field. So having that kind of connection and maybe having a slightly different perspective on that work, in my view, strengthens the work. So I think that's one reason that this kind of interdisciplinary collaborative science is important. You asked about methods in particular. My view is I am not a methods purist. Like, I teach networks, I use network science often, but I believe that there's a lot of different methods that we have. And I also believe that the best we can do is have knowledge about these different methods, be open to these different approaches, so that maybe we can combine across methodologies and we can strengthen our work in that way. There's also the issue, you talked about statistical approaches, but there's also different methodological approaches, such as quantitative versus qualitative. I don't even like saying versus, but it can be, if you bring that work together and maybe you're not an expert, and none of us can be an expert in all things, but if we're willing to collaborate across whether it's disciplinary or methodological lines, my view is that will likely strengthen our work. And I feel that science is at risk if we hold too tightly to this is the right way to do things. Because at that point, when we say this is the right way to do things, we've closed our mind to all those other perspectives and possibilities. So I think that it's important for those reasons.
Yeah, I think keeping an open mind in science is pretty much always a good thing, right? It allows us to get a greater depth of knowledge with whatever subject we're looking at. And it also lets us see the interconnectedness of different fields and different disciplines.
Yes, I agree.
So one thing that I was curious about is if you could talk to us a little bit about what was your first experience with social network analysis? Walk me through the first time you ever even heard the term social network analysis. And was it something you were just immediately infatuated with? Or were you sort of I don't know what this thing is?
Yeah. Well, so this was very new. I was trained as a developmental psychologist, and this was not in the field really at the time, because my first work with social network analysis, I was a graduate student. I was getting ready to start my master's thesis. And to give a little bit of the backstory, I had started my master's thesis using a different type of model that was really common in developmental psychology, which was a growth model. And I had it, I'd been working on it. Some things, I learned some things about the data where I decided I couldn't use this project and I needed a new project. And as a student, I will say it was really devastating, but I was so devastated that my thesis had fallen apart that I was just so open to now I can do whatever I want. So I'm just going to do whatever I want. I've spent all this time on this thesis that now I have to let it go. And I was open to trying something new. And I had heard about this process, this program, social network analysis, that people were using in Europe. And as I said, I had some connections there. I had connections at the time in Finland and Sweden. And I had a couple people that I knew there that were starting to use these models. And I was fascinated at the idea that up until this time in my study of relationships, I had looked at dyads and the interactions between dyadic interactions, which are very complex. And there's unique methods that you need to look at those interactions. But I was so excited that you could include all of the dyadic interactions at one time, look at the entire network and how everyone's interacting with everyone else. This idea of identity or individuality within the network was there because you could look at individual characteristics and agency within these social groups. And you can also look at the level of the social group. So I was so excited about this method. And in a way, I knew nothing really about what I was getting myself into because it was really new at the time. And it was really kind of a clunky, system. Like we had now social network analysis can be run within R and there's some syntax and programming, but it wasn't so user-friendly when I first started. And I actually ended up traveling again to work with some folks in Finland that were using this method. And that's how I first got exposed and decided that I wanted to use it for my master's thesis. So I told my graduate supervisor that I wanted to use this for my master's thesis. And he gave me a couple weeks to think about it and asked me if I was sure I wanted to do this a few times and if I knew what I was getting myself into a few times. And I was sure I wanted to do it. And I'm glad that I did. Like it's a wonderful method, but as I would say when I'm teaching my students, there was a lot to learn. There was a lot of language. This developed within sociology. So I was visiting sociology departments and talking to sociologists to learn more about the method. And there was different ways that things were done within, sociology versus my background in psychology. But again, I feel like having both perspectives has really influenced and fed into my work. And I believe that it has strengthened the work that I'm able to do. But there was a period of being really uncomfortable for a really long time, not knowing, a lot of the language or trying to figure out these models, communicate, internationally to try to get some training. And later on, I had more, formal training where I was able to get more formal training in social network analysis. But that you kind of asked about how I got to my first experience, and that was it. I just decided, if this fell through, so I'm just going to go for, what my dream, method would be, which, as I told you, I really wanted to look at social groups and that individual agency within those social groups. So it seemed like it was a good fit. So.
Well, I think that says so much about you that, this original plan sort of fell through. And I think most people would have said, all right, well, what's the easiest thing that I can do next to just get this thing done? Whereas you were basically like, let's just explore this entirely new method. And, you really have put yourself at the forefront of social network analysis. And it's really incredible. That probably took a lot of bravery to do that, especially since you didn't really have anyone with you who was also using that method.
Yeah. It's interesting, Aubrey. I've looked back on it and I think sometimes it's nice, to not know what you don't know, because I saw all the potential and I didn't, fully understand, I think, what I was taking on. Probably my graduate supervisor who was saying, are you sure? Do you know what you're doing? But, again, I was sure I wanted to do this because it was exactly the work that I wanted to do. And then I had the support, along the way. So my graduate supervisor has also learned quite a lot about social network analysis, as he was supporting me through that, training. So, yeah.
Well, I think that makes us very similar in the sense that, I think oftentimes when people think of us as a mentor and a mentee, we can sometimes come across as a little bit of an odd couple pairing because, here you are, this very talented methodologist working in social networks, and then I'm doing all of this stuff with body image. And I think some people are like, wait a second, how does this work out? But really, where we have so much common ground is that, we both put ourselves at the forefront of this thing that we're really passionate about. And, I've always appreciated that you've just encouraged me to just reach for the stars with everything because, why not? And I think that it's probably because of your experience with networks and, you went for it and you did it. And I think that that's so admirable.
Thank you, Aubrey. And I do encourage you because you are incredibly talented.
Oh, thank you, Dawn. So one question that I had for you, moving on to a little bit of a different path is, sort of about your role of service in, your position as an academic, because looking at your CV, you have done so much service in your time here at ASU. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, maybe for people who are listening who aren't really familiar with academia, why is service important for an academic to do? And, what does service sort of mean to you?
That's a great question. So service is something that I am passionate about within academia and within my personal life. So there's two parts of this. I feel that service is really important, and it's important for me because there were a lot of people that were willing to do service that guided me. I was just talking about my graduate supervisor, but there's been a lot of other people in my life that have provided service, mentorship, something like that for me in my career. And just to give you some background, I was a first generation student, so I didn't have anyone in my family that knew what I needed to do, who I needed to contact, how I was going to, support myself through school financially, or really what the expectations might be once I was there. And there were a lot of people that have reached out, and provided service for me over the years to be able to be where I am today. And so I guess when it comes to service to academia and to, things that, like, I don't know if you would consider mentorship service or teaching, but, working with, junior scholars, graduate students, that's something that I'm very open to at ASU, but also more broadly. If students come to me looking for direction because I needed that direction, I also want to be sure that I am providing, the support that students will need to advance their career through reviewing manuscripts and things like that, serving as program reviewers, helping conferences be organized, and also at the university, again, supporting the university is important to me. Supporting my school is important to me because selfishly, I want a healthy, happy, functioning university and school and a welcoming place for, especially for students to be able to come and learn and train and then advance their careers. So for me, I'm very grateful for the experience that I've had going through academia. And I didn't have the answers, but it always seemed like there was someone, and I also think about, staff positions, the times where I would just get on the phone and call because I didn't know who I was supposed to be asking the question to, and I would be directed to where I needed to go. So all those little things over the years when, again, if we're talking about like a social system or structure, like I had no status, I had no, I was nobody to that university or that school, but it was really important that someone was willing to offer that hand to me. And so I try to remember that and give back in the ways that I can. I will say, just putting on like a mentorship hat, like everything else, you have to keep it in balance, right? Like there's going to be ways, depending on what your career of choice is, that service will be evaluated in your life. And I do believe in a life balance. So it's going to be really important that stay mindful of that. That's something that I've had to remind myself that, yes, service is good, but there has to also be the balance there so that the other pieces are also in place and you can continue to advance yourself in your career so that you can continue to give back in the ways that you would like to.
Right. And I think that's wonderful advice to hear, particularly from a faculty member. So often, I think as a grad student, we feel this pressure to be working constantly, and it's really easy to forget to have balance in your life. And I think it's really important that, we hear more faculty talking about the importance of balance and how you cultivate balance in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, as we sort of transition towards the end of the podcast, I'm wondering, Dawn, is there anything that, you wanted to end on or anything that you wanted to say? We'll have a title card up if you're watching on video, or Dawn's information will be in the show notes if you're looking to contact her. But I'm just wondering, is there anything that you would like to end on?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for this experience. It's been really fun, and just the exposure that you're giving to ideas. And so thank you for that, Aubrey. And also, I guess I just want to say relationships matter. So be kind, to the people in your life. And I think that's all I want to say. So thank you.
Of course. So we're now going to do our final 3 questions. So these are going to be the questions that allow us to get a little bite of your personal philosophy. You can answer them with as much length as you'd like. If you want to talk about these in more depth, that's totally fine. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So question number 1, Dawn, is what is something that you are certain of?
I don't know it all.
I think that is something we can all be certain of. So the next question is, what does balance mean for you?
Wow, that's a great question. What does balance mean? For me, it's being in that comfortable place where I know that I'm contributing and giving back, but I'm also not overwhelmed and feeling, any kind of fear or anxiety. So I think that requires different things. Like that, it requires me to take care of myself, that it requires me to take care of personal relationships, and that requires me to show up, for my work and my career in a meaningful way. And I can usually do that if I take care of those, other places. So
I think that's a balance we all strive for. So my last question, Dawn, is what is one rule that you would want everyone to follow?
I think I'm going to go back to be kind.
I think that's wonderful. So thank you so much, Dawn. I have so appreciated you having this conversation with me today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Looking forward to it, Aubrey. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.
If you would like to connect with today's podcast guests, please email the following. For Aubrey Hoffer, email alhoffer@asu.edu. For Dawn DeLay, email dawn.delay
DeLay@asu.edu.
Connect with us and get access to all of our podcasts by visiting thesanfordschool.asu.edu/podcast, where you will also find links to all of our social media channels. This conversation has come to an end, but our work here continues.